introduce yourself and explain your relationship to Harvest?
My name is Scott Flanagan, and my wife Jackie and I are the founding pastors of Harvest Community Church. In 1989, I was graduating from seminary. I was sitting in the library, and I vividly remember this thought that the Lord planted in my heart, that my wife and I would plant a church someday. And over the next few months, we were connected to a larger event with the Assemblies of God, and we hear about this thing that they called the Decade of Harvest. And within the goals of Decade of Harvest was the desire to plant 5,000 new churches in the United States. And we knew at that point that we would be connected to that goal. We would be one of those church planters. There's a lot of things that would really connect to our vision for planting Harvest. It would be centered around the gospel. We wanted to see people get saved, but we felt like we wanted to bring our family into a community, to grow up in that community and begin to plant in that community and impact lives in that same community. And Roseville happened to be that place. We wanted to go after those who were kind of outcast, and those who had been maybe broken or hurt from maybe past church relationships, or people who professed Jesus to their families or to their community, and maybe in not such a healthy way. And we felt like we could have a church that would present really the compassion, the grace, the salvation, and the healing of Jesus to a community, and maybe even find those prodigal sons and daughters coming back to the Lord. It started in 1993. My wife and I were pastors at a church in Santa Clara when we felt the call to basically abandon, to leave by faith and go to Roseville without a job, without an income, just being trustful and being filled with trust when it came to the Lord's voice, and being obedient to that and saying, God, you're gonna work things out. We started saying, where would be a good place to meet? And we found Heritage Oaks Elementary School at the time was one of the few schools out in the area. At that time, schools weren't readily available to churches. Just before I went to work in the morning, I'd go and I'd pray over that school, over that campus, faithfully for about 6 weeks. And on this one evening, I happened to get home late, got to bed about 1 in the morning, and when that alarm clock rang around 5:30 to get up and go pray over that campus, asking for God's favor, I was praying over the school, over the children, and just saying, Lord, is this the place where our church could meet? I would usually walk the big field, walk over the land, but I was so tired, I just said, God, can I just go in and maybe lean against a building? I'm kind of tired today, and pray over there. And he didn't say no, so I figured that was a yes. And as I go inside the campus and kind of leaning on a building, I noticed the corner of the building was, it looked like there had been a fire at the school. And all of a sudden, a flame peeks out of the side of the building, and I realized the school's on fire. I drove across the street to the fire station, told them there was a fire across the street, showed them where it was. They took down my information, and I drove to work that day. And later that day, I got a call from Kelvin Lee, who is the superintendent of the Dry Creek School District, thanking me for being there. He thought I was a jogger. Little did he know I was leaning against his buildings because I was so tired. And they wanted to give me an award for being there and reporting this fire. And I'm like, wow, we got favor. I think we'll probably be able to meet at that school. And sure enough, I met with Kelvin, told him the story of why I was there, how I was praying over that campus, and he said, hey, if you wanna rent our school for a church, you can do it. Our church started growing to a place where not only did they start talking about a permanent home, but they said, when are we finally gonna get our own building, you know? So we're currently sitting in the Blue Oaks location. And at the time when the Lord put it on our hearts to move here, it was simply a field. We came out here in prayer, and I would say there's about 20 to 30 people from the church that came out here and prayed. I remember there were some of the people a part of that prayer time, they took their shoes off, believing they were standing on holy ground, and they just began to pray over this campus, over this property, over this land, and just believing that this would be a light for Jesus. This place would be a light for Jesus. What was really exciting is how the Lord provided those funds. I would say The $450,000 to $500,000 that we had to raise came in less than 10 months. And when God calls you to do something, He provides. It's just how it works. The future of Harvest is very bright. I'm naturally an optimist, but this goes beyond my optimism. I love Pastor Paul and Shekinah and their leadership. I love how the church has grown. I was a professor over at Epic Bible College, and Paul was one of my students. And I remember even going home and saying to Jackie, Jackie, there's this guy named Paul Gottlieb, and I don't want to steal him from his church, but I would love him to join Harvest Community Church and be on our staff someday. And little did I know that that prayer was answered in a different way at a different time. We wanted to make sure that when we left, that it would be left in good hands, and this church would succeed beyond our wildest dreams, succeed beyond anything we had ever done. And having Pastor Paul and Shekinah here as leaders, we're seeing that happen right now, and we're so excited for the future. We hope we get to be around long enough to see all the glorious things that God is going to do here.
It's crazy. 20 years ago, this is the field where I would come out here. As a young man, I felt called of God, and I had nowhere to preach. I had no ministry. I was in Bible college, and I would come out here at sunset to spend time with God. And I would walk out here and I would start preaching as if I was preaching to thousands and hundreds of people. But it was a place where I would spend time with God. And it was a place where God began to speak to me and tell me things about how He's going to use me in ministry.
Long before we were together, long before our paths even crossed, I used to drive out to this field, park my car, play worship music, sit on the hood of my car, and watch the sunset and just pray. Because at that point, I had no idea what the future held. And I would just pray about my future, talk to God, ask Him questions. And this was one of my favorite places to go to pray and just talk to God about what the future held.
We ended up moving to San Jose for ministry. We got married, we were in San Jose, and when we would come back to Roseville to visit family for holidays, this is the field and the place where I would come back and pray and spend time with the Lord again, like it was 20 years ago when I was a young man.
He would disappear, and I'd be like, where did Paul go? It was always to the field.
We started really praying and feeling like God wanted us to plant a church. Our time in San Jose was coming to an end. And as we started praying and really thinking about where we would plant a church, all of a sudden we kept thinking about this area, the field. So we met with a man in our district that helps plant churches, and we met in July 2017 at Brookfields. And after this meeting, we knew we're going to plant a church in West Roseville. This is what God's called us to do. And we jumped in our car from Brookfields and we drove out here to West Park.
And we thought, man, it would be so neat to plant a church in a young community and grow up as a church within the community.
This area had developed so much. There were so many homes, so many families, schools, stores, everything was coming in. And we're driving through street after street and we're praying and we're feeling God, and I'm crying, and I felt like the Lord said, for the last 10 years, your family has grown. You have 3 kids now, you've been married, and I felt like the Lord said, now the next 10 years, I'm going to plant a church family with you.
You said, I know the first church that we're going to connect with when we start the church is we're going to connect with Pastor Scott over at Harvest.
Pastor Scott was one of my Bible college teachers. I love Pastor Scott and his family and the church, and I knew when we get on this side of town, we're going to partner together to do something great for God. That was our plan. July 2017 was when we were driving around praying and having this moment, and I know it was July 2017 that Pastor Scott had told the board he was stepping down. I get a call later that day from Pastor Brett Allen, our district superintendent, and he tells me this on the phone: there's a church in Roseville that has opened up and they are looking for a pastor, and the church is Harvest Community Church. Pastor Scott Flanagan is stepping down, and my mind is blown. And it was just as if God took all the dots and just started connecting it.
Yeah.
It's crazy. And so we ended up taking the job at Harvest, and
They liked us. They called
liked
us
They
back.
called us back. So we've been your pastors for 4 years. So 2 years ago, right before COVID hit, one of our board members reaches out to me and says, hey, what are you doing? I want to come meet you at the church. I want to show you something. I jumped in the car, and he began to drive and drove us right out here to West Roseville, to this spot right here.
Filled.
The field that for 20 plus years has been in our lives, and the place where we felt like just a few years, a year or two ago, we were going to plant a church in. Our board member said, there is a group of people that I know, and they have some land. And I thought, okay, that's interesting. And he said this to me. He said, for over 30 years, this group has been holding on to this land for a specific reason. This group thinks that this church, our church, is the church, and that you're the pastor, and that they want to give this land to our church. 30 plus years ago, God told them to hold on to this land, because one day you are going to take this land and give it to a church so that they can build a new church building on it and build the kingdom of God. And I just was speechless, like, what? Are you serious? I didn't really even know how to process that. And we started trying to figure out, what would this look like if this group gives us this land out here. It was very exciting. We started planning, preparing, praying, talking to the board of what would this look like. And the whole time God kept doing some amazing things where all of a sudden there was extra money that started coming in. We were blessed financially. And now we're at a place where here we are, and this is 4.5, 5 acres, millions of dollars of value that this group is giving our church. And we're sitting literally in a miracle. We've hired an architect, we've started drawing plans. We are working towards building a new church out here where God called us to plant a church, and surrounded by all these homes and development. And we think for such a time as this, God is positioning us for the next 27 years of ministry at Harvest Community Church. It's exciting.
Yeah.
It's crazy.